In exactly 43 minutes and 17 seconds, Harper Westfield would do something that would turn Riverside Prep Academy upside down. But nobody, not her bullies, not her teachers, not even her best friend, saw it coming. What happened in Ms. Stone's literature class that Tuesday afternoon would expose secrets that this elite school spent millions to hide. But here's what nobody knew: Harper wasn't just any quiet girl. And Landon Thorne wasn't just any bully. Their collision would uncover a web of corruption, abuse, and cover-ups that reached the highest levels of American private education. If you've ever felt powerless, ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up, ever wondered what would happen if someone finally fought back, this story will remind you why your voice matters. And maybe, just maybe, it'll inspire you to share your own moment of courage in the ways that feel right to you. Because what started with a torn skirt in room 237 ended with congressional hearings, criminal investigations, and a movement that changed how America protects its students. But first, you need to understand who Harper Westfield really was. Harper Westfield sat in the back corner of every classroom for a reason. Not because she was shy, though everyone assumed that. Not because she was antisocial, though the popular kids labeled her that. She sat there because it gave her the clearest view of every exit, every potential threat, every micro-expression of danger. Her pencil movements were precise, military precise, each stroke calculated, controlled, purposeful. Quinn Matthews, her only real friend, called it Harper's weird perfectionist thing. But Harper called it survival training. Those weren't random doodles covering her notebook margins. They were floor plans, exit strategies, and something that looked disturbingly like combat positions mapped out with the methodical precision of someone who'd been trained to think 3 moves ahead of any threat. At 7:15 that Tuesday morning, Harper arrived at Riverside Prep Academy carrying more than textbooks in her worn canvas backpack. She carried 3 years of carefully suppressed rage, 14 different self-defense techniques memorized down to the muscle memory, and a promise she'd made to a dead cousin that she'd never be helpless again. Landon Thorne commanded Riverside Prep the way generals commanded armies. At 6'3", with the kind of movie star jawline that made freshman girls forget how to speak. He was everything the school's marketing brochures promised their donors' sons could become. Captain of the basketball team, president of the senior class, destined for Yale in the fall, assuming his father's latest donation cleared. But here's what the brochures didn't mention: Landon's father. Judge Marcus Thorne had donated $3.7 million to Riverside Prep, not for a new library or science wing, for something much more valuable: the guarantee that his son would never face consequences. That expensive Rolex on Landon's wrist wasn't just a status symbol, it was a reminder. Every time he checked the time, he saw his father's expectation etched in platinum and diamonds. Be perfect, be powerful, be untouchable. And if anyone challenged that perception, make them regret it. Riverside Prep Academy wasn't just a school, it was an ecosystem. The predators wore letter jackets and trust fund confidence. The prey carried scholarships and anxiety disorders. And the teachers, they learned quickly which students' parents could end careers with a single phone call. Ms. Rebecca Stone had been teaching here for 8 years, long enough to recognize the signs, long enough to know that when students like Harper Westfield went completely silent, it meant they were either planning to disappear or planning to explode. Rebecca had been a scholarship kid herself once, at a different elite school where staying invisible was the only way to survive. She'd made herself a promise 15 years ago: if she ever saw another girl going through what she had endured. She wouldn't be silent anymore. Today, that promise would be tested. October 15th started like any other Tuesday. Harper arrived early, claimed her strategic corner seat in room 237, and prepared for another day of invisible survival. Landon strutted in 5 minutes late to first period, because punctuality was for people without trust funds. Neither of them knew that in exactly 6 hours and 23 minutes, their worlds would collide in a way that would make headlines from Boston to Los Angeles. It started small. It always does. During second period, biology, Landon accidentally knocked Harper's books off her desk while passing. His friend Brett Carson mistakenly spilled water on her homework during third period chemistry. Tyler Reed happened to record her stumbling to pick everything up, already envisioning the viral potential of Scholarship Girl fail compilation. But Harper didn't react the way they expected. Most targets would flush red, fight back tears, maybe run to the bathroom to compose themselves. Harper simply bent down, collected her things with those same precise movements, and returned to her seat. Her breathing remained controlled. 4 counts in. Hold for 4, 4 counts out. The pattern her Krav Maga instructor had drilled into her muscle memory during 3 years of intensive training. Combat breathing, designed to maintain clarity under stress. Landon frowned. He'd been expecting tears, fear, submission. Instead, he got something that looked disturbingly like assessment. The way Harper's eyes tracked his movements, calculated distances, identified potential weapons within reach, it reminded him uncomfortably of the way his father studied opponents before destroying their careers. During the passing period between third and fourth periods, Quinn Matthews cornered her best friend by the water fountains. As photographer for the school newspaper, Quinn had documented 3 years of Riverside's unspoken hierarchy through her lens. But today felt different. Today, she started recording specifically. "Harper," she whispered, pulling out her phone to show a video compilation that made Harper's blood run cold. "I've got 17 videos of them targeting you, just from this week." Harper stared at her friend's screen. Months of careful documentation. Evidence that no one had bothered to collect before. Incidents she'd dismissed as random cruelty suddenly revealed their calculated pattern. "Why?" Harper asked, her voice barely audible above the hallway chaos. "Because somebody needs to witness this. And somebody needs to remember what really happens in these halls when adults aren't watching." Quinn's camera had captured more than just bullying. It had documented the systematic way Riverside Prep protected its predators while abandoning its victims. Every deliberately ignored assault, every conveniently missing administrator when violence erupted, every time a scholarship student's complaint disappeared into bureaucratic silence. Ms. Stone had been watching Harper Westfield for months. The way she positioned herself with her back to walls. The way she scanned rooms like a soldier checking for snipers. The way she never turned her back to open spaces. Rebecca recognized these behaviors because she'd lived them herself. 15 years ago, Rebecca Stone had been Rebecca Martinez. Scholarship kid at a different elite school where staying quiet meant staying alive. She'd endured their torment in silence, watched them destroy her art project without speaking up, accepted their cruelty because fighting back seemed impossible. But Harper was different. There was something coiled beneath her silence, something that reminded Rebecca of a spring wound too tight. She'd started keeping her own documentation, photographs of Harper's bruises, records of incidents, preparation for the explosion she sensed was coming. By fourth period, the pattern was clear to anyone paying attention. Landon's crew was escalating systematically, testing Harper's boundaries, measuring her responses, building towards something bigger, more public, more humiliating. Paige Foster approached Harper during lunch, her face carrying the haunted expression of someone who'd survived Landon's attention and lived to warn others. As student council secretary and former victim, Paige had learned to recognize the signs. "He's working up to something public," Paige warned, her voice tight with remembered fear. "That's his pattern. Small stuff first, then something humiliating that breaks you completely. After that, you either transfer out or spend the rest of high school as his personal entertainment." Paige's words carried the weight of experience. 2 years ago, she'd been Landon's target. The harassment had escalated until she'd attempted suicide rather than face another day at school. The administration had covered it up, sent her to a wellness retreat in Switzerland, and made sure the incident never appeared in any official records. Harper's pencil moved in those precise patterns across her notebook margin. To anyone watching, it looked like nervous doodling, but Quinn recognized the shapes now: floor plans, exit strategies, and something that looked disturbingly like tactical positioning for close-quarters combat. During fifth period study hall, Quinn cornered Harper in the library stacks, between the dusty philosophy texts that no one ever checked out. The afternoon light filtering through tall windows cast long shadows between the shelves, creating a confessional atmosphere that demanded truth. "Harper, what aren't you telling me? Those drawings in your notebook, I've seen them before. My brother's military manuals have diagrams that look exactly like that." Harper's hands stilled. For 3 years, she'd kept her secret buried deeper than nuclear waste. But looking at Quinn's concerned face, seeing the genuine worry in her friend's eyes, she made a decision that would change everything. "When I was 14, Harper began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My cousin Emma was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. He broke into our house while she was visiting. He had a knife. My parents were at work. It was just me and Emma." Quinn's face went pale. The Emma Rodriguez case had been national news 3 years ago. A beautiful college freshman killed by an obsessed ex-boyfriend who'd stalked her across 3 states. The case had sparked congressional hearings on domestic violence and victim protection. "I hid in the closet and called 911, Harper continued, each word extracted like shrapnel from an old wound. "I listened to her scream for help. I listened to her beg him to stop. I listened to her die, and I did nothing because I was a scared little girl who didn't know how to fight." The weight of survivor's guilt hung between them like smoke. Quinn reached for her friend's hand, but Harper pulled away. Not ready for comfort she didn't believe she deserved. "After the funeral, my parents enrolled me in every self-defense class in the state. Krav Maga, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. For 3 years, I trained like my life depended on it, because someone's life had depended on it, and I'd failed them." Quinn stared at her best friend as puzzle pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The way Harper always knew where the exits were. The way she moved with unconscious precision through crowded hallways. The way she could disappear into shadows when she sensed danger approaching. "That's why you're always aware of everything around you," Quinn whispered. "You're not paranoid. You're prepared." "I swore I'd never be helpless again," Harper said, meeting her friend's eyes for the first time. "I swore that if someone needed protecting, I wouldn't hide in a closet and hope someone else would save them." Quinn gripped her camera tighter, understanding that she was documenting more than just high school drama. "Then, I'm going to make sure everyone sees the truth. Whatever happens, there will be evidence. There will be witnesses. And there will be justice." Neither girl noticed Tyler Reed crouched behind the biography section, phone recording every word of their conversation. Tyler had been trailing them since lunch, hoping to catch some gossip worth sharing with Landon's crew. What he'd captured instead was explosive. By the time sixth period rolled around, half the school had heard whispered versions of Harper's story. The quiet girl in the corner wasn't just shy, she was some kind of secret fighter. A girl with training. A girl with nothing left to lose. Tyler's social media posts had done their work. Instagram stories, Snapchat updates, TikTok videos. The rumor mill had transformed Harper from invisible scholarship kid to mysterious warrior woman in the span of 2 hours. Landon Thorne sat in his usual center stage position in Ms. Stone's literature classroom. But today, his smile carried an edge that made even his followers nervous. He'd heard the rumors, he'd seen Tyler's videos, and he'd decided that Harper Westfield needed to be taught a lesson about spreading stories. Ms. Stone began her lesson on To Kill a Mockingbird and the theme of moral courage, unaware that she was about to witness the very concept played out in real time. The irony would be lost on no one who survived what came next. Who can tell me what Atticus Finch meant when he said real courage is when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway? Ms. Stone asked, her eyes scanning the classroom. Harper's hand rose slowly, steadily, with the controlled movement of someone who'd made a decision. It means doing what's right even when you know it will cost you everything. Ms. Stone nodded approvingly, recognizing something significant in Harper's tone. Excellent analysis, Harper. Can you give us a modern example? Before Harper could answer, Landon's voice cut through the classroom like a blade drawn across silk. How about when quiet girls tell stories about being secret ninjas? That takes courage. Or delusion. The classroom atmosphere shifted instantly. 23 students held their breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Ms. Stone's jaw tightened, recognizing the predatory tone that preceded violence. "Mr. Thorne, that comment is inappropriate and," Ms. Stone began. "I'm just wondering," Landon continued, his voice dripping with false innocence that fooled no one. "If our little karate kid here is as tough as Tyler says she claims to be." Harper's pencil movement stopped. For the first time in 3 years, her hands were completely still. When she looked up at Landon, her eyes held something that made Brett Carson unconsciously lean away from her. "I never claimed to be tough," Harper said quietly, her voice carrying a new quality that made everyone in the room pay attention. "But I learned to be prepared." Landon stood up from his desk, all 6 feet 3 inches of entitled rage and wounded pride towering over the classroom. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Winners don't let anyone challenge them. Winners crush challenges before they become threats." Prepared for what? To hide in corners and let your friend take pictures of people who hurt your feelings. "Landon, sit down, now." Ms. Stone's voice carried the authority of 8 years teaching privileged sociopaths who believed rules were suggestions. But Landon was past listening to teachers. He was fixated on Harper, who remained seated with unnatural calm, hands folded on her desk like a student preparing for prayer. Or preparing for war. "You know what I think." Landon moved toward Harper's corner, each step deliberate and threatening. "I think you're exactly what you look like. A scared little girl who makes up stories to feel important." The entire class held its breath. This was it, the moment that separated victims from survivors. Silence from explosion. The moment when Harper Westfield would either break or reveal exactly who she'd become in the 3 years since Emma's death. Harper stood up slowly, not to flee, not to cower, but to establish her ground, to claim her space, to send a message that retreat was no longer an option. "Landon," she said, her voice carrying a new tone that made Ms. Stone reach for the emergency button on her desk. "You should really sit back down." And that's when everything at Riverside Prep Academy changed forever. Later, investigators would debate who escalated first. Security cameras would show Landon reaching for Harper's skirt with predatory intent. But those same cameras wouldn't capture the years of torment that led to that moment. The systematic destruction of dignity that Riverside Prep had perfected into an art form. "Let's see how tough you really are," Landon snarled, his hand shooting toward the waistband of Harper's uniform skirt with the casual violence of someone who'd never faced consequences. The fabric tore with a sound like thunder. 23 students gasped in unison. Ms. Stone screamed, "Stop!" Quinn's camera captured everything in high-definition clarity that would later be analyzed by federal investigators. But Harper didn't scream. Harper didn't cry. Harper didn't run. Harper moved. Time dilated the way it had during her most intensive training sessions. The classroom became a dojo. Landon's aggressive lunge became leverage she could use against him. His size became a liability rather than an advantage. His confidence became catastrophic overreach. Harper's elbow strike was textbook perfect, rising from her core, powered by 3 years of disciplined rage and tactical training, aimed with surgical precision at the solar plexus of her tormentor. Every hour of practice, every bruise from sparring, every technique drilled until it became instinct, it all culminated in this moment. The impact sent all 200 pounds of Landon Thorne crashing into the brick wall behind him. The sound echoed through the building like a gunshot, reverberating down hallways and into administrative offices where comfortable lies were about to become impossible to maintain. Silence. Complete. Absolute. Deafening silence. 23 teenagers stared at Landon Thorne slumped against the wall, consciousness flickering like a broken neon sign. A thin trickle of blood ran from his nose, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. Harper stood exactly where she'd been, uniform skirt torn but dignity intact, breathing steady, hands at her sides. To anyone who didn't know better, it looked like Landon had simply thrown himself into the wall in some bizarre accident. Ms. Stone was the first to move, not toward Landon, but toward Harper, her face cycling through shock, fear, and something that looked disturbingly like pride. "Are you hurt?" she asked quietly, her teacher's instincts overriding everything else. Harper shook her head, never taking her eyes off Landon's prone form. "He is." Quinn's camera had recorded everything. 27 seconds from sexual assault to unconsciousness. She looked at the footage, then at her best friend, and made a decision that would define both their futures. "Everyone needs to see this," Quinn whispered, her fingers already working to upload the video to every platform that mattered. But what happened next shocked everyone in that classroom. Instead of rallying around their fallen king, Riverside Prep's student body exploded with stories that had been suppressed for years. Within minutes of Quinn's video going live, the school's carefully maintained facade cracked like ice in an earthquake. Paige Foster posted about her own assault, complete with documentation she'd kept hidden for 2 years. Sage Miller shared footage of previous incidents that administration had dismissed as boys being boys. Most shocking of all, Brett Carson Landon's closest ally and enforcer wrote a confession that went viral within the hour. "I helped hurt innocent people because I was scared of being hurt myself. I watched Landon destroy lives because it was easier than standing up to him. I'm done being a coward." The avalanche of truth was unstoppable. Years of suppressed trauma, documented harassment, and institutional betrayal poured out of Riverside Prep's student body like water from a burst dam. Parents started asking questions they'd never thought to ask. Reporters started making calls to sources they'd never bothered to cultivate. Ms. Stone stood in front of her classroom, watching paramedics treat Landon while police officers took preliminary statements, and made an announcement that would end her career at Riverside Prep while saving her soul. "I need everyone to know something," she said, her voice carrying to the hallway where other teachers had gathered like rubberneckers at an accident scene. "I've been documenting incidents at this school for 3 years. Sexual harassment, physical assault, systematic bullying, all covered up by an administration more concerned with donations than student safety." Principal Cross arrived with the calculated panic of a man whose career was imploding in real time. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from running through hallways, his face pale with the realization that 20 years of careful reputation management was about to evaporate. Judge Marcus Thorne was 15 minutes behind him, flanked by 3 lawyers whose combined billable hours could fund a small country's education budget. His fury could have melted steel, but it was tempered by the cold calculation of a man who'd spent decades protecting his family's legacy. "This is clearly a case of unprovoked assault," Judge Thorne announced to anyone within hearing distance, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "My son was attacked by an unstable individual who has been planning this violence for months." But Harper's response silenced even the judge. She stood in that hallway, torn skirt and all, facing down one of the most powerful men in the state, with the kind of calm that comes after surviving the worst moment of your life. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying a quality that made seasoned lawyers pause their note-taking, "your son sexually assaulted me in front of 23 witnesses and multiple cameras. What I did was defend myself. What you're doing right now is exactly why girls like me stay quiet for so long." Judge Thorne's face cycled through several shades of red, his carefully controlled judicial demeanor cracking like old paint. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, young lady." Harper looked at this powerful man who'd spent his career protecting his son from consequences, and smiled for the first time all day. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been underestimated one too many times. "Actually, sir, I think you're the one who doesn't understand who you're dealing with. My name is Harper Westfield. My cousin was Emma Rodriguez, and I think it's time this school learned what real justice looks like." The mention of Emma Rodriguez changed everything in that hallway. Even Judge Thorne recognized the name. 3 years ago, Emma's murder had sparked national conversations about domestic violence, victim advocacy, and the failures of institutions designed to protect the vulnerable. Harper had never publicly connected herself to that case, carefully maintaining her anonymity to avoid the media attention that had destroyed other family members. But standing in that hallway, facing down the same system that had failed Emma, she made her family's tragedy public ammunition. Detective Sarah Chen arrived within the hour, her unmarked sedan pulling into Riverside Prep's circular driveway with the understated authority of someone who answered to the state attorney general rather than local political pressures. Unlike the campus security guards who owed their jobs to the school board, Detective Chen had been looking for a reason to investigate Riverside Prep for 2 years. "Ms. Westfield," Detective Chen said, her voice carrying the professional warmth of someone trained to interview trauma victims. "I'm going to need you to tell me everything, not just about today, about everything." Harper looked around the hallway at the gathering crowd of students and teachers and administrators who'd spent years pretending not to see what was happening in their halls. She looked at Quinn, still clutching her camera like a weapon. She looked at Ms. Stone, whose career was probably over, but whose conscience was finally clear. "Everything?" Harper asked. "Everything," Detective Chen confirmed, pulling out a recording device that would capture testimony destined for federal courtrooms. Harper nodded, feeling the weight of 3 years' silence lifting from her shoulders like chains being broken. "It started 3 years ago, right after Emma's funeral. That's when my parents decided I needed to learn how to protect myself. But it really started here at Riverside, on my first day, when I realized that some predators wear letter jackets instead of prison uniforms." Within 48 hours, Riverside Prep Academy was under federal investigation. Title IX violations stretching back a decade. Systematic cover-ups of sexual assault. Financial irregularities connected to donation-based discipline policies. The kind of institutional corruption that made headlines and ended careers. Quinn's documentation proved invaluable to investigators. 3 years of carefully recorded incidents, complete with timestamps, witnesses, and evidence that administrators had been actively suppressing assault reports to maintain their pristine reputation and donor relationships. Ms. Stone's secret files were even more damaging. Email chains between Principal Cross and board members discussing how to handle problem families. Financial records showing how disciplinary actions correlated directly with family donation amounts. Communications proving they'd known about Landon's pattern of behavior and chosen to enable it rather than address it. But the most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source. Brett Carson walked into the police station with his parents' lawyer and a flash drive containing 3 years of text messages, photos, and videos that painted a picture of systematic harassment campaigns that went far beyond typical bullying. "I want to make a deal," he told Detective Chen, his voice shaking with the weight of accumulated guilt. "I have evidence of things that make what happened to Harper look minor by comparison." The flash drive contained documentation of coordinated harassment campaigns against scholarship students, group chats, planning pranks that were actually calculated psychological warfare. And most damaging of all, recordings of Principal Cross and Judge Thorne discussing how to handle problem families who asked too many questions about their children's treatment. 3 days after his encounter with Harper's elbow, Landon Thorne woke up in a private hospital room with a concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and a father angrier than he'd ever seen him. The private room, the discreet medical team, the lack of official police report, all of it arranged by Judge Thorne's connections and money. "You embarrassed our family," Judge Thorne hissed, his voice low and venomous in the sterile hospital air. "You got beat up by a girl, in front of everyone. Do you understand what this does to our reputation, to everything I've built?" For the first time in his 18 years of life, Landon looked at his father and saw him clearly, not as a protector or provider, but as the source of every cruel impulse he'd ever acted on, every lesson in dominance, every demonstration that power meant never backing down, every example that consequences were for other people. "I learned from the best," Landon said quietly, his voice hoarse from the damage to his throat. Judge Thorne's hand moved toward his son's face in the same motion that had shaped Landon's understanding of power for 18 years, the casual violence that taught him that strength meant hurting others before they could hurt you. But this time, Landon caught his father's wrist with reflexes sharpened by years of athletic training. "I'm done," Landon said, meeting his father's shocked gaze without flinching. "I'm done being your project. I'm done hurting people because you hurt me." and I'm done protecting you from the consequences of what you taught me to become." What Landon told Detective Chen during his voluntary confession would ultimately send his father to federal prison for corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy charges. But more importantly, it would start his own journey toward becoming someone he could live with being. 6 months later, Riverside Prep Academy no longer existed. The federal investigation had uncovered decades of corruption, cover-ups, and systematic abuse of students whose families lacked the political connections to fight back effectively. The campus was sold to the state for $1 and converted into the Emma Rodriguez Center for Student Advocacy, a public school focused on supporting survivors of bullying and assault while providing comprehensive education to students from all socioeconomic backgrounds. Harper Westfield cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony, flanked by Quinn Matthews and Ms. Stone, who'd been hired as the center's first director of student safety and advocacy programs. The irony of the location wasn't lost on anyone. Room 237, where everything had changed, became the Peer Counseling Center. But the real transformation was harder to photograph for news outlets. It was in the way students now reported incidents without fear of administrative retaliation, in the way teachers were trained to recognize and respond to signs of abuse rather than ignore them, in the way a culture of silence had been systematically replaced by a culture of accountability and support. Landon Thorne spent his senior year at a public high school 30 miles away, completing 200 hours of community service at a women's shelter and attending therapy twice a week with a counselor who specialized in breaking cycles of abuse. His father's conviction on federal corruption charges meant the family fortune was frozen in legal proceedings that would take years to resolve. The adjustment was brutal, from private school privilege to public school reality, from unlimited resources to working part-time at a local youth center to help pay for gas and school supplies, from being feared to being just another student trying to graduate and figure out what came next. But slowly, carefully, with the help of counselors and mentors who'd seen other young men walk this path, Landon began to understand the difference between strength and violence, between leadership and domination, between protecting others and protecting his own ego. Harper's story had gone national, but she'd turned down every interview request and book deal that followed. Instead, she'd started a nonprofit organization teaching self-defense to teenage girls with an emphasis on when not to fight, how to de-escalate situations, and, most importantly, how to find and use their voices before violence became necessary. Violence should always be the last option, she told her students during their first class. Held in a rented community center space, donated by grateful parents. But silence should never be the only option. Your voice is your first weapon. Your awareness is your first defense. And your courage to speak up is your greatest protection. Quinn had parlayed her documentation into a documentary that won awards at film festivals and sparked congressional hearings on sexual assault in American schools. But she was proudest of the advocacy training program she'd developed, teaching other students how to be effective witnesses, allies, and documentarians when they witnessed injustice. Ms. Stone had found her true calling at the Emma Rodriguez Center. After years of feeling powerless to protect her students within a corrupt system, she now ran programs that gave both students and teachers the tools to create genuinely safe learning environments. "I used to think my job was to teach literature," she told a conference of educators 6 months after the incident. "Now I know my job is to teach courage. The literature is just one way to do that." 2 years after that October afternoon in room 237, Harper received a letter that brought tears to her eyes. It was from a girl in Oregon who'd seen Quinn's documentary and found the courage to report her own assault because Harper's story had shown her that speaking up was possible. Then came letters from Texas, New York, California, Michigan. Girls and boys who'd found their voices because someone had shown them that survival and dignity could coexist, that victims could become victorious without becoming violent, that justice was possible even when the system seemed designed to protect predators. But the letter that mattered most was handwritten on simple notebook paper, with slightly shaky penmanship that spoke of someone still learning to write with honesty rather than deception. Harper, it read, I know I can never undo what I did to you or the others. I know saying sorry isn't enough to heal the damage I caused. But because of you, I'm learning to be the person I should have been all along. Thank you for showing me that real strength doesn't have to hurt people. Thank you for giving me a chance to become someone worth being. It was signed, Landon Thorne, Student Counselor, Youth Crisis Center. Today, Harper Westfield still sits in the back corner of every room she enters, but not because she's hiding, because she's watching, protecting, making sure no one else has to choose between silence and survival the way she once did. Her movements are still precise, still calculated, still purposeful, but now they're powered by choice rather than fear, by strength rather than survival instinct, by the knowledge that she'd faced her worst nightmare and emerged not just intact, but empowered. Quinn still documents everything through her camera lens, but now she captures moments of courage instead of evidence of cruelty, moments when ordinary people choose to speak up rather than stay silent. Moments when systems change because individuals refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. And, in the Emma Rodriguez Center for Student Advocacy, Room 237 holds a simple plaque that reads, Real courage is standing up when it costs you everything and knowing it's worth it anyway. Harper's story wasn't special because she knew how to fight. It was special because she chose when to fight, why to fight, and what was worth fighting for. Every day, in classrooms and hallways across America, students face the same choice Harper faced: stay silent and stay safe, or speak up and risk everything. The difference between victims and survivors isn't strength or training or even courage. It's the moment when you decide that someone else's dignity, including your own, is worth defending, no matter the cost. If Harper's story reminds you of your own moment of choice, whether you stood up or stayed silent, whether you found your voice or you're still looking for it, know that your experience matters. Your story has power. And sometimes, sharing that power in whatever way feels right to you is how movements begin, how cultures change, and how the next generation learns that they don't have to suffer in silence. Because courage isn't inherited. It's learned. It's practiced. It's passed from one person to another through stories that remind us we are stronger than our silence, braver than our fear, and more powerful than any system that tells us otherwise. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. 3 years later, Harper received an email that made her hands shake as she read it. It came from a teacher in rural Montana, describing how a shy 7th grader named Jessica had stood up to her bullies after watching Quinn's documentary in health class. The girl had quoted Harper directly, "Violence should always be the last option, but silence should never be the only option." That same week, a high school in Philadelphia implemented new reporting protocols after their student council president cited Harper's case in a presentation to the school board. A college in Michigan added Harper's story to their freshman orientation curriculum. A youth center in Detroit painted Harper's words on their wall, "Your voice is your first weapon." But perhaps the most profound change happened in places that never made headlines. In quiet conversations between friends who decided to speak up about what they'd witnessed. In classrooms where teachers recognized the signs of abuse and chose to act rather than ignore. In families where parents finally asked their children the hard questions about what really happened at school each day. The ripple effect extended beyond individual courage to institutional transformation. Schools across the country began implementing Harper Protocols, mandatory reporting systems that couldn't be influenced by donor pressure, anonymous reporting apps that protected whistleblowers, and regular audits of disciplinary disparities that revealed hidden patterns of favoritism. Legislative changes followed. The Emma Rodriguez Act, signed into law 18 months after that October afternoon, required all educational institutions receiving federal funding to maintain independent oversight of sexual assault reports. It mandated administrator training, protection for student journalists, and severe penalties for institutional cover-ups. Harper often wondered what Emma would think of how her death had ultimately saved so many lives. The movement that began with a torn skirt in room 237 had become proof that ordinary people possessing extraordinary courage could dismantle systems that seemed untouchable. And in schools across America, in classrooms where the brave and the broken sit side by side, Harper Westfield's legacy lives on in every student who chooses to speak rather than stay silent, to act rather than accept, to believe that their voice, however small it might seem, has the power to change the world. Because it does. Because they do. Because sometimes, the most important revolutions begin with a single person deciding they've had enough, and finding the courage to say so out loud.